Hello, I'm Karen Chauvin and I'm happy to be your instructor for this session. Today's class is focused on 3 integrated philosophies that should be applied when developing the plans for any particular industrial project or development. In doing so, risks of schedule delays, cost overruns, and especially potential impacts to the environment can be significantly reduced. The reason I want to focus on this topic today is to raise awareness of the issues of project failure in the industrial world. Up to 70% of projects are facing schedule delays, and anywhere from 50 to 70% of projects are facing cost overruns. What's more interesting, however, is that up to 70% of the delays and the relevant associated costs are caused by environmental and social issues and the communication issues around those. These are all non-technical sustainability related issues that are not typically focused on in standard project management training, and details vary in engineering programs as well. And even though most of these issues are preventable, a lot of engineers and project managers do not take the appropriate time and thought to identify risks, to find solutions to avoid them, or to plan those solutions into their projects. So if you want your projects to stay on track for success and you want to stand out as a leader, it would be in your best interest to understand what to avoid, how to avoid them, and when to do so, right? So I'd like to introduce a few intersecting and complementary philosophies to consider. These are sustainable design and operations, design for closure or that extended life cycle perspective, and lean. Sustainable design is what most of you might be familiar with. Minimizing footprints and impacts, reducing operational expenses through efficiencies, and applying the 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, and recover. Designing for closure, or that more life cycle perspective, brings in the considerations of the longevity of the development, the infrastructure and equipment, and what we might need to do when the lifespan is complete. Lean philosophies bring in the concept of waste elimination of all types, streamlining processes, and the derivation of greater value for the customer. Now we want to think about sustainability in the full life cycle of the project, from concept through planning and managing design and construction, to operating that facility and then closure of those facilities as well. We want to think of the whole system optimization, the design of the facilities and the processes within, the most optimized sequencing of development and operation to minimize risks and costs at the end of its operational life, and the sequencing and management of the project phases themselves. So in essence, we want to be eliminating wastes within the entire life cycle of the project and wastes of all types. Now this is a lot to think about, but if you do think about minimizing risks to humans and environment for all life stages, as well as those project risks, such as costs and schedule overruns, you will have appropriately considered those triple bottom line trade-offs, costs, and benefits, where we try to find a good balance between environment, social, and economic aspects to move forward with. So let's talk about environment to show some examples of how we might start this thinking. There are many types of environmental aspects to be considered that might impact how we plan and design our development, including topography, soft ground, natural drainage paths and flood zones, sensitive lands and species, sources and accessibility of water or energy, and of course, climate change and variability. There's more, but I won't try and list them all. Now, on the flip side, we have other examples where our project might actually impact those external environmental receptors. So we need to think about hunting and fishing lands, vegetation and territory and habitats, the drinking water quality and air quality. Are we going to be disturbing or restricting access to ceremonial or ancestral lands of local stakeholders? What about the noise and the trafficking frequency of supplies coming and going from site, and the material hazards and safety of those things moving? And what will it look like after? Okay, so now when we think about how we might eliminate those risks and optimize the plans and designs by applying the various strategies mentioned before. In the realm of sustainable design and operation, this really seems to be an easier thought process because a lot of people are familiar with these things, and a lot of ideas typically arise from the teams involved. Secondary containment for spill production, minimizing the impacts and footprints, having fewer and safer chemicals in use and fewer consumables. Of course, we hear a lot about using more efficient equipment and maximizing resource and reuse and recycling within the systems. It is also typical to hear a lot about having appropriate operating guidelines, training, and management systems. Now, when we come to the end of life perspectives, where I personally see a lot of opportunity, there's a lot fewer suggestions being offered. So I'm going to use mining for an example because I've been in mining for close to 20 years. But some of the things I think about are our waste materials. How can we stabilize those waste materials so that they might actually be safe for the environment and or usable for future use for something else? I'm going to use tailings failures as an example. I'm sure you've heard of some tailings failures in the last number of years. If we could have made sure that those tailings were drier, denser, more compacted in place, even if that embankment completely erodes away, those tailings will not travel as far, okay? And if the tailings are more chemically stable, then even if the density is low and they can flow, then they should theoretically have fewer toxicity impacts to deal with in terms of cleanup. If we think about geomorphic design, which is essentially creating landforms that are more natural to the region, blending in with the landscape where possible, theoretically these structures should also be more stable in the end. If we think about that, nature created the landforms that are nearby under the same climate conditions, over long periods of time and weathering under the elements, and they're still there, right? So why not mimic nature a lot more in our designs? And if we can find ways to utilize our byproducts and extract more value out of our wastes, not only do we minimize the waste we need to manage later, but we also gain value to help pay for those things. Okay. And of course, if we can look at things, set things up to have them more passively managed or they're self-sustaining in the long term, that saves companies a lot of time and money on managing those aspects over the long term. All right. Now, finally, from a lean perspective, there are huge opportunities. In mining, again, there are a lot of transitions from phase to phase, not just in the physical sense when it comes to material movements and flows, but also in consideration of moving from exploration to planning and design and assessment to construction, operation, and then closure. There's all these different stages that we need to be thinking about. So finding ways to optimize these transitions is key, and finding ways to improve collaboration and early integration of all the requirements of those different stages. If we can do that earlier on, that facilitates optimizing the transitions, okay? And on a physical sense, in mining, we like to move materials a lot, and there's a lot of material to move. So this is an example where we can reduce a lot of wastes of moving materials, and minimizing rehandle saves a lot of time and effort and money for our company. So if you think about things on a grander spectrum for all of our projects, we can find examples like this. Okay, and these are things that we should be talking about for every project. And it's why that we get the right people in the room to collaborate and to communicate when we assess risks and opportunities during planning. So now, in closing, I'd like to encourage you to think strongly about these concepts when planning your next projects. Other training is available within the realm of sustainability, integration of sustainability into project planning, and other softer skill aspect of all relevant risks and opportunities within a project scope. And learning about these aspects will help to reduce those risks of project failure that we started with. Thank you.